The snow fell softly on Madison, Wisconsin, as Detective Rachel Torres stared at the file that had haunted the police department for 2 decades. December 23rd, 2004. The day 8-year-old Marcus Whitfield vanished without a trace from his family's modest home on Elm Street. The case had consumed careers, destroyed relationships, and left a community forever changed. Now, 20 years to the day, she held a photograph that defied everything they thought they knew. The man in the surveillance footage from the Greyhound station looked exactly like Marcus would have looked at 28. Same distinctive cleft chin, same piercing green eyes, same small scar above his left eyebrow from when he fell off his bike at age 6. But that was impossible. They had found his blood-soaked jacket by the frozen lake. They had searched for months. The community had grieved, moved on, accepted the tragic reality. If you're following this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with viewers from around the world. Now, let's continue with what happened next. Detective Torres had been a rookie patrol officer when Marcus disappeared, fresh out of the academy and eager to prove herself. She remembered the frantic search parties, the way the whole town had rallied together. Hardware store owner Bill Hendricks had organized volunteer groups. The Methodist Church had served hot coffee and sandwiches to searchers. Local hunters had combed the dense Wisconsin forests with their dogs. But winter had been brutal that year, with temperatures dropping to -15 degrees, and after 3 weeks, hope had faded. The Whitfield family had never recovered. Marcus's mother, Linda, had suffered a complete nervous breakdown and spent 6 months in a psychiatric facility. His father, David, a quiet man who worked at the paper mill, had started drinking heavily and died in a car accident just 2 years later. His older sister, Emma, only 12 when Marcus vanished, had been shuffled between relatives before aging out of the foster system. The family home on Elm Street had sat empty for years, a constant reminder of the tragedy that had shattered so many lives. Torres pulled up the original case files on her computer, scrolling through hundreds of pages of witness statements, search reports, and dead-end leads. The investigation had been thorough. FBI agents had interviewed everyone in the neighborhood, checked sex offender registries, and followed up on dozens of reported sightings across 3 states. They had explored every possibility: stranger abduction, family involvement, accidental death. The working theory had eventually settled on Marcus wandering onto the frozen lake and falling through thin ice, with his jacket somehow washing ashore while his body remained trapped beneath. But now, this man had walked into the Greyhound station, purchased a ticket to Madison, and told the clerk he was going home for Christmas. The security camera had captured him clearly: tall, lean, wearing a navy peacoat, and carrying a small duffel bag. When the clerk asked for ID, he had handed over a perfectly valid Wisconsin driver's license with the name Marcus David Whitfield, issued just 6 months ago in Milwaukee. Torres drove through the snowy streets toward the station, her mind racing through possibilities. Mistaken identity seemed unlikely. The facial recognition software had matched 17 distinct points with Marcus's childhood photos. A cruel hoax was possible, but who would go to such elaborate lengths, and why now? The most unsettling possibility was that Marcus had been alive all this time, somewhere out there, living under circumstances too horrible to imagine. The Greyhound station sat on the outskirts of town, a dreary concrete building that served as Madison's connection to the wider world. Torres showed her badge to the clerk, a middle-aged woman named Dolores, who had worked there for 15 years. "He seemed nervous," Dolores explained, rewinding the security footage. "Kept looking over his shoulder like someone might be following him. Asked when the next bus to Madison was. Paid in cash." "Did he say anything else? Mention where he'd been coming from?" "Milwaukee, according to his ticket stub. But honey, I've been doing this job long enough to know when someone's running from something. That man had the look of someone who'd been through hell and back. Torres studied the footage again, frame by frame. The man who called himself Marcus moved with a slight limp that hadn't been there in childhood. His hands trembled when he counted out bills. Most telling were his eyes. They held a wariness, a hypervigilance that spoke of years spent looking over his shoulder. Whatever had happened to him, wherever he had been, it had left marks that went far deeper than the physical. She called Captain Rodriguez from her car, explaining the situation while watching her breath fog the windows. "I need a unit at the Whitfield house on Elm Street," she said, "and we better contact Emma Whitfield. She has a right to know before this hits the news." Emma Whitfield Patterson now lived in Minneapolis, where she worked as a social worker, helping missing and exploited children. She had never married, never had children of her own, dedicating her life to cases like her brother's. When Torres reached her by phone, the silence stretched so long she thought the call had dropped. "That's impossible," Emma finally whispered. "We buried an empty coffin 20 years ago. We had a memorial service. I visit his grave every year on his birthday. I understand how difficult this must be, but we need you to come to Madison. If this man really is your brother, you're the only family he has left. If he's been alive all this time." Emma's voice cracked. "Where has he been? Why didn't he come home? Why didn't he try to contact us?" These were the questions that would haunt the investigation. As Torres drove toward Elm Street, she passed the elementary school Marcus had attended, now renovated and expanded. She passed the park where he had played Little League baseball, where a small memorial bench still bore his name. The entire community had lived with his absence for 2 decades, and now they would have to confront the possibility that their grief had been built on a lie. The house on Elm Street stood empty and dark, its windows boarded up and yard overgrown. But as Torres pulled into the driveway, she noticed fresh footprints in the snow leading to the back door. Someone had been here recently, had stood at the kitchen window where Linda Whitfield used to watch for her children to come home from school. The bus from Milwaukee was scheduled to arrive at 3:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Torres had arranged for backup, for counselors, for medical personnel if needed. But nothing could prepare them for the moment when Marcus Whitfield, if that's who he really was, stepped off that bus and tried to reclaim a life that had moved on without him. As she waited in her patrol car, Torres thought about all the families she had worked with over the years, families torn apart by disappearances and false hopes. She had seen how desperately people wanted to believe their loved ones were still alive, had witnessed the cruel disappointment when leads turned cold. But she had also seen genuine miracles, children found after years of captivity, families reunited against impossible odds. The question that haunted her now was whether Marcus Whitfield's return would be a miracle or a nightmare. Some disappearances, she knew, were escapes from unbearable circumstances. Some missing persons didn't want to be found. And some stories were so dark that the truth was more terrible than the mystery itself. The afternoon light was already fading when the Greyhound bus rounded the corner, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. Torres checked her weapon, called in her position, and prepared to meet a ghost who might be all too real. In a few minutes, she would either witness one of the most remarkable reunions in law enforcement history or uncover a deception so elaborate it defied belief. But as the bus pulled into the station and its doors hissed open, Torres realized that the most important question wasn't whether this man was really Marcus Whitfield. The question that would determine everything was, if he had survived for 20 years, what had he survived? And what had driven him to finally come home on Christmas Eve, to a family that no longer existed and a community that had long since mourned his death? The first passenger stepped off the bus, an elderly woman carrying shopping bags, then a young couple with a crying baby, then a teenager with a guitar case. Torres held her breath as the fourth passenger emerged from the bus, a tall man in a navy peacoat, moving with that slight limp she had noticed in the security footage. Even at a distance, even in the dim light of the winter afternoon, she could see the unmistakable features that matched the age progression photos the FBI had created years ago. Marcus Whitfield had come home for Christmas, and Detective Rachel Torres was about to discover that some mysteries are more terrifying when they're finally solved. Emma had driven through the night from Minneapolis, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. She had called in sick to work, something she had never done in 8 years at the Children's Advocacy Center. Her supervisor, knowing her history, had simply said, "Go, find out the truth." The truth. Emma had spent 20 years believing she knew what had happened to her little brother. She had built her entire career around that truth, had counseled hundreds of families who faced the same devastating uncertainty her family had endured. She had become an expert in the psychology of loss, in the stages of grief, in the long journey toward acceptance. But what did you call it when acceptance turned out to be premature? She met Detective Torres at the Madison Police Department, a modern building that hadn't existed when Marcus first disappeared. The old station had been in the basement of City Hall, cramped and outdated. Progress, Emma thought bitterly. Everything had changed while her family had remained frozen in that terrible December of 2004. "He's asked to speak with you alone first," Torres explained, leading Emma down a corridor lined with photographs of officers killed in the line of duty. "He's been in the interview room for 2 hours now, hasn't said much beyond confirming his identity. He seems fragile, traumatized, definitely. But Emma, I have to prepare you. We don't know where he's been or what he's been through. This conversation could be very difficult." Emma nodded, though her legs felt unsteady. Through the one-way glass, she could see a man sitting at a metal table, his hands folded in his lap. He wore the same navy peacoat from the security footage, and his dark hair was shorter than she'd expected, almost military style. From this angle, she could see the scar above his left eyebrow, the one he'd gotten when he crashed his bike trying to impress the neighbor girl. Her throat tightened with recognition and disbelief. "Before you go in," Torres said gently, "we need to discuss some ground rules. If at any point you feel unsafe or overwhelmed, just give us a signal. We'll be monitoring from here. And Emma, try not to expect him to be the 8-year-old boy you remember. 20 years is a long time, especially if he's been through trauma." Emma straightened her shoulders, drawing on the professional composure that had carried her through thousands of difficult conversations. But this wasn't work. This was Marcus, her baby brother who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, who collected baseball cards and dreamed of playing for the Milwaukee Brewers. When she opened the door to the interview room, he looked up, and Emma's carefully maintained composure crumbled. Those were definitely Marcus's eyes, the same unusual shade of green that she saw in the mirror every morning. But they held depths of pain and wariness that no 8-year-old should possess. "Emma," he said quietly, and his voice was exactly what she had imagined it would sound like, deeper than their father's, but with the same gentle cadence. "You look just like Mom did when she was young." The words hit her like a physical blow. She sank into the chair across from him, struggling to breathe. "Marcus, is it really you?" He nodded, and for a moment she saw a flash of the little boy she remembered, uncertain and seeking approval. I know it's hard to understand. I wanted to come back so many times, but I couldn't. I wasn't allowed to." "Wasn't allowed to? Marcus, what happened to you? Where have you been?" His hands began to tremble, and he clasped them tighter together. "I can't. Not yet. I need to know first. Mom and Dad, are they—" The question she had dreaded. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 20 years of loss settling on her shoulders. They're gone, Marcus. Mum died 7 years ago. Her heart just gave out. The doctors said it was genetic, but I think it was really from the grief. And Dad, he died in 2006. Car accident, but he'd been drinking. He never got over losing you. Marcus's face crumpled, and he buried his head in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs that seemed to come from some deep, locked-away place. Emma reached across the table instinctively, but he flinched away from her touch. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I tried to get back to them. I tried so many times. Marcus, you were 8 years old. Whatever happened, whatever someone did to you, it wasn't your fault." He looked up at her then, and the expression in his eyes was so adult, so world-weary, that it broke her heart. "You don't understand. I wasn't taken by a stranger, Emma. I left willingly. I thought I was protecting you." The words made no sense. Emma shook her head, trying to process what he was telling her. Protecting me from what? From him. From what he was doing to me at night when everyone was asleep. The implications hit her like ice water. Emma's professional training kicked in, the years of working with abused children providing a framework for understanding what her brother was revealing. But this wasn't just another case. This was Marcus. This was her family. This was the truth that would rewrite everything she thought she knew about their childhood. "Who?" she managed to ask, though part of her already knew the answer. "Uncle Robert." The name fell between them like a stone into still water. "He said if I told anyone, he'd start doing it to you too. So when he offered to take me away, to a place where I'd be safe, and you'd be safe, I went with him." Robert Whitfield, their father's brother, the successful businessman who lived in Chicago, who visited every few months and brought expensive gifts. He had been at the house the weekend Marcus disappeared, had helped with the search, had comforted their grieving parents. Emma remembered him at the memorial service, tears streaming down his face as he delivered a eulogy about the nephew he'd loved like a son. "But the blood by the lake," Emma said weakly. "Your jacket." "He cut my arm to get the blood, tore up my jacket and left it there to make it look like an accident. He told me it was the only way to make sure nobody came looking for me, that Mom and Dad would be able to heal if they thought I was dead." Marcus rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a thin white scar that ran from his wrist halfway to his elbow. He was very careful about it. Said he'd learned how to do it from medical training in the army. Emma stared at the scar, physical evidence of a deception so elaborate and cruel that her mind struggled to accept it. Robert had been a medic in Vietnam, had parlayed that experience into a successful medical supply business. He would have known exactly how much blood loss would be believable, how to create a crime scene that would convince investigators. "Where did he take you?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "A cabin in northern Minnesota, about 4 hours from the Canadian border, miles from anywhere. He said it was temporary, that he was arranging for us to go somewhere far away where we could be a real family." Marcus's voice became flat, detached, the tone Emma recognized from her most traumatized clients. "But we never left the cabin, not for years." The room felt too small, too warm. Emma struggled to breathe as the full horror of what her brother had endured began to sink in. "How did you finally get away?" "He got sick, cancer. By the time I was 16, he was too weak to stop me from leaving. But I was so scared, Emma. He'd told me so many times that if anyone found out what we'd done, I'd go to prison too. That people would think I was just as bad as him because I'd agreed to go with him. Marcus, you were a child. You were being abused. No one would have blamed you. I know that now. It took years of therapy to understand it. But when you're 16 and you've been isolated from the world for 8 years, when someone's been telling you every day that you're complicit in your own disappearance. You believe it. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to maintain some semblance of professional composure. What happened after you left the cabin? I made it to Duluth. Lived on the streets for a while, then got picked up by child services. They placed me with a foster family, the Johnsons. Good people who didn't ask too many questions about where I'd come from. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. They helped me get my GED, encouraged me to go to college. I studied psychology, became a counselor myself. Thought maybe I could help other kids who'd been through what I had. So you've been in Minnesota all this time? Mostly. I moved to Milwaukee 2 years ago, got a job at a treatment center for adolescents. I've been going by the name David Johnson, took the surname from my foster family, but I always planned to come back someday to tell you the truth about what happened. I kept putting it off. The longer I waited, the harder it became. Emma leaned forward, studying her brother's face. Despite the pain etched in his features, despite the years of trauma, she could see traces of the boy she remembered. The way he tilted his head when he was thinking, the habit of pressing his lips together when he was nervous. "Why now?" she asked. "Why did you decide to come back on Christmas Eve?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Because I'm dying, Emma. Pancreatic cancer. Same as what killed Robert. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, probably less." The words hit her like another devastating blow. She had just gotten her brother back, had just learned the truth about his disappearance, and now he was telling her she was going to lose him again. "There are treatments," she said desperately. "Clinical trials, experimental therapies. I've explored all the options. The cancer's too advanced, spread too far." He looked up at her with those familiar green eyes. "I didn't want to die without seeing you again, without telling you the truth. And I wanted to make sure Robert could never hurt anyone else. Marcus, Robert died 12 years ago, heart attack." For the first time since she'd entered the room, Marcus smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Good. I'm glad he's dead. I'm glad he can't hurt any more children." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 20 years of separation and loss settling between them. Emma thought about all the Christmases she had spent alone, all the birthdays when she'd wondered what Marcus would have looked like, what kind of man he would have become. In a way, her 8-year-old brother had died that December night in 2004. Not by drowning in a frozen lake, but by disappearing into a nightmare that had lasted for years. But the man sitting across from her now had survived. He had escaped, had built a life, had found a way to help other damaged children heal from their trauma. Despite everything Robert had taken from him, Marcus had become exactly the kind of person their parents would have been proud of. "I want to know everything," Emma said finally, "about your life in Minnesota, about the Johnsons, about your work. I want to know who you are now, not just who you used to be." Marcus nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "And I want to know about you, about Mom and Dad's last years, about your work with missing children." He paused, studying her face. "I read about you online, you know, before I decided to come back. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, Emma. Mom and Dad would be proud too." "They would be prouder of you," she said, reaching across the table again. This time, he didn't flinch away when she took his hand. His skin was cold, his fingers thin, the physical evidence of his illness. But his grip was steady, real, proof that this wasn't another cruel dream. Detective Torres knocked softly on the door before entering. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss the next steps. There are media reports starting to surface about Marcus's return. Word is getting out, and we need to be prepared for the attention this is going to generate." Emma looked at her brother, seeing the flash of panic in his eyes. He had spent 20 years living in the shadows, avoiding attention, keeping his true identity hidden. The prospect of becoming the center of a media circus clearly terrified him. "We don't have to talk to reporters," Emma said firmly. "You have rights. You can choose how much of your story to share, if any." "Actually," Marcus said slowly, "maybe it's time for the truth to come out. There might be other victims, other children Robert hurt before me. If my story encourages them to come forward." Torres nodded approvingly. "That's very brave of you, Marcus, but we'll handle any media contact through the department's public information officer. You don't have to face reporters alone." As they discussed logistics and next steps, Emma found herself studying her brother's profile, memorizing the details of his face. 6 months, maybe less. After 20 years of believing he was dead, she would have to watch him die for real. But this time, she would be with him. This time, he wouldn't face his darkest moments alone. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, as Torres prepared to leave. "I'd like to visit the house on Elm Street if that's possible. I know it's been empty for years, but I need to see it again." "I can arrange that," Torres replied. "The current owners live in Florida. They've been trying to sell the property for the past 5 years. I'm sure they wouldn't object to you visiting." Emma squeezed her brother's hand. "We'll go together. And Marcus, you're not alone anymore. Whatever time we have left, we'll spend it as family." For the second time that day, Marcus smiled. It was tentative, fragile, but genuine. 20 years after vanishing into a nightmare, he had finally come home. And while the homecoming wasn't what either of them had dreamed it might be, it was real, it was honest, and it was theirs. The house on Elm Street looked smaller than Marcus remembered. He stood at the end of the driveway with Emma and Detective Torres, studying the boarded windows and overgrown yard. Snow had drifted against the front porch where he used to sit with his father on summer evenings, listening to baseball games on an old transistor radio. "The city's been maintaining basic upkeep," Torres explained, producing a key ring from her jacket pocket. "Mowing the lawn in summer, checking for break-ins. The owners have been hoping someone would buy it and fix it up, but given the history, people don't want to live in the house where the Whitfield boy disappeared," Marcus finished. He understood. Every neighborhood had houses like this, places where tragedy had occurred, where the very walls seemed to hold on to sorrow. "Can we go inside?" The front door stuck, warped from years of weather and neglect. When it finally opened, the smell hit them immediately. Musty air, old wood, and something else Marcus couldn't identify until he stepped into the living room. His mother's perfume, somehow still lingering after all these years. The scent brought back a flood of memories so vivid he had to steady himself against the doorframe. The furniture was gone, probably sold or donated years ago, but the bones of the house remained the same. Hardwood floors that creaked in all the familiar places. The kitchen window that looked out over the backyard where he had played with neighborhood dogs. The narrow staircase he had raced up and down hundreds of times, always taking the steps 2 at a time. "Your room was upstairs?" Emma asked, following his gaze. Marcus nodded, but made no move toward the stairs. He wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, he walked through the empty living room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. This was where the Christmas tree had stood every December, where he had opened presents on Christmas morning, while his parents sat on the couch drinking coffee and watching him with sleepy smiles. "I remember the last Christmas," he said quietly. "Dad gave me a baseball glove, a real leather one, not the cheap plastic kind I'd been using. Mom made cinnamon rolls from scratch, and they filled the whole house with the smell of butter and sugar." Emma wiped her eyes. "I remember that glove. You slept with it for a week, trying to break it in. I was going to try out for Little League that spring." Marcus turned away from the window, not wanting his sister to see the pain in his face. "Robert had promised to come to my games, said he'd teach me how to throw a curveball." They moved through the house slowly, Emma sharing memories while Marcus mostly listened. She told him about their mother's last years, how Linda had turned the dining room into a shrine to Marcus's memory, covering the walls with school photos and artwork he'd created, how their father had started drinking more heavily after the first anniversary of the disappearance, how he'd lost his job at the paper mill and never quite recovered. "I tried to keep them together," Emma said, as they stood in the kitchen where their family had shared thousands of meals. "But I was just a kid too. And the grief, it consumed everything. Every conversation, every decision, every moment of every day was about you being gone." Marcus leaned against the counter where his mother used to pack his school lunches. "I thought about calling so many times, especially in the beginning. But Robert said if anyone ever found out what had really happened, it would destroy Mom and Dad. He said they'd blame themselves for not protecting me, that the guilt would kill them." "Maybe it would have been difficult," Emma admitted. "But Marcus, they died anyway. They died believing they had failed you, believing they would never see you again. At least if they had known the truth. They would have known I was alive. They would have tried to find me." Marcus's voice cracked. "I robbed them of that hope. I let them die thinking I was at the bottom of that lake." Emma moved closer to her brother, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "You were 8 years old and being manipulated by someone who spent months grooming you. Robert was an adult, a family member, someone we all trusted. You made the best decision you could with the information you had." They climbed the stairs together, each step creaking under their weight. The hallway was darker than Marcus remembered, with all the windows boarded up. Emma pushed open the door to what had been their parents' bedroom, now completely empty, except for old carpet and faded wallpaper. "This is where Robert came to me at night," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "After Mom and Dad were asleep. He said it was our special secret, that it meant I was growing up, becoming a man." Emma's hand tightened on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I'm sorry I didn't know, didn't see what was happening. You were 12, and he was very careful, very manipulative. He made me feel special, chosen, said I was mature for my age, that I could handle adult responsibilities." Marcus shook his head bitterly. "Classic predator behavior. I know that now, after years of therapy and working with other survivors. But when you're a kid—" They moved to the next room, Emma's old bedroom, painted yellow with white trim. She had loved that room, had begged their parents for a canopy bed like her friend Jennifer's. Now it felt hollow and sad, stripped of everything that had made it a place of childhood dreams and teenage secrets. "He came to this room too, didn't he?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer from the look on Marcus's face. "A few times. Toward the end, right before I agreed to go with him. He said he was going to start spending more time with you, helping you grow up the way he'd helped me." Marcus clenched his hands into fists. "That's when I knew I had to leave. I couldn't let him touch you." Emma sat down on the floor, overwhelmed by the weight of what she was learning. Her brother had sacrificed his childhood, his family, his entire life to protect her from abuse she hadn't even known was happening. The guilt was crushing, even though she intellectually understood that none of it was her fault. The third bedroom was the smallest, Marcus's room. When Emma pushed open the door, they both gasped. Unlike the rest of the house, this room hadn't been completely emptied. A small bed frame remained, along with a dresser and a bookshelf that still held some of his childhood books. On the walls, faded posters of baseball players watched over the empty space. Marcus stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside. "Mom kept it exactly the same," he said, running his fingers over the dusty surface of the dresser. "I thought she would have packed everything away." She couldn't. For the first few years, she'd sit in here every night before bed, reading your books or just talking to you like you were still there. Emma picked up a worn copy of Where the Red Fern Grows from the shelf. "This was your favorite." "I read it to myself every night at the cabin," Marcus said. "Robert let me keep one book, and this was the one I chose. I must have read it 100 times." They spent another hour in the house, sharing memories and filling in gaps in each other's stories. Marcus told Emma about his foster family, the Johnsons, who had asked few questions about his past but had given him the stability and love he needed to heal. He talked about college, about discovering his calling as a counselor, about the satisfaction of helping other young people work through their trauma. Emma told him about her own journey, how losing him had shaped her career choice, how working with missing and exploited children had been both healing and painful. She had never married, never had children of her own, always feeling like she was waiting for something or someone to come home. "I have a good life," she said, as they prepared to leave. "I love my work. I have friends. I've traveled. But there was always this hole, this missing piece. I thought I'd learn to live with it." "You did learn to live with it. You built something beautiful from something terrible." Marcus took one last look around his childhood bedroom. "I'm proud of you, Emma, and I'm grateful that we found each other again, even if it's not for long." As they locked up the house and walked back to their cars, Detective Torres approached them with her phone in hand. "I just got a call from the FBI," she said. "They want to reopen the investigation into Robert Whitfield. Your story has prompted them to look into other possible victims." Marcus nodded, though Emma could see the exhaustion in his face. The emotional toll of revisiting his past, combined with his illness, was clearly wearing on him. "I'll cooperate however I can. If there are other survivors out there, they deserve to know they're not alone." "There's also the matter of your legal status," Torres continued. "You've been declared dead for 20 years. We'll need to work with Social Security, get your identity restored. It's going to take some time." "I don't need much time," Marcus said quietly. "But I'd like to be able to use my real name again before—" He didn't finish the sentence, but they all understood. Marcus Whitfield wanted to die as himself, not as the false identity he'd been forced to adopt. He wanted his gravestone to bear the name his parents had given him. Emma drove her brother to a hotel near the hospital where his oncologist had agreed to review his medical records and discuss treatment options. Even though Marcus had said the cancer was too advanced, she wasn't ready to give up hope. They had just found each other again. She needed more time. "Will you stay in Madison?" she asked as they sat in the hotel lobby. "For however long?" "If you want me to. I don't have much keeping me in Milwaukee." Marcus managed a tired smile. "Besides, I think I'd like to see one more Christmas in the place where I was happy. Before Robert, before everything went wrong, I was happy here." "We'll make it a good Christmas," Emma promised. "We'll do all the things we used to do, drive around looking at Christmas lights, make cookies, watch old movies. We'll make up for all the Christmases we lost." That night, Emma lay in her hotel room, thinking about the strange turns life could take. 24 hours ago, she'd been planning to spend Christmas alone, as she had for the past 2 decades. Now she had her brother back, along with a truth that was both devastating and liberating. Marcus was dying, but he was also alive, more alive and whole than she had dared to hope. The next morning brought reporters and camera crews to the hotel, drawn by the story of the boy who had returned from the dead. Marcus agreed to a carefully managed press conference with Emma and Detective Torres flanking him as he told his story to the world. He spoke calmly and clearly about his abduction, his years in captivity, and his decision to finally come forward. "I want other survivors to know that it's never too late to tell your truth," he said, looking directly into the cameras. "And I want people to understand that healing is possible, even from the worst trauma. I survived, and I built a good life. I helped other people heal. That matters more than the years I lost." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The FBI received dozens of calls from people with information about Robert Whitfield. Two other men came forward, both now in their 40s, describing similar patterns of abuse from their childhood. A support group for adult survivors contacted Marcus, offering their assistance and fellowship, but perhaps the most meaningful response came from Marcus's former colleagues at the treatment center in Milwaukee. They had known him as David Johnson, a dedicated counselor with an intuitive understanding of trauma. Now they understood why. His supervisor sent a letter describing the impact Marcus had made on the young people he'd worked with, how many lives he had touched and changed. Christmas Eve arrived grey and cold, with fresh snow beginning to fall as Emma and Marcus drove through Madison's neighborhoods looking at holiday decorations. They had spent the morning baking cookies using their mother's recipe, which Emma had carefully preserved. The kitchen of Marcus's hotel suite filled with the same smells they remembered from childhood: vanilla, cinnamon, butter, and love. "Do you think they know?" Marcus asked as they sat in Emma's car outside their old house on Elm Street. "Mom and Dad? Do you think somehow they know I made it home?" Emma considered the question seriously. She had never been particularly religious, but losing Marcus had made her think deeply about what happened after death, about whether love could transcend physical existence. "I think they do," she said finally. "I think they've been waiting for this moment as long as we have." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall on the house where they had been children together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more interviews, legal paperwork, difficult conversations with doctors about treatment options and end-of-life care. But tonight was Christmas Eve, and they were together, and for the first time in 20 years, Emma's family felt complete. Marcus reached over and took her hand, his grip weak but warm. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Even when everyone else accepted that I was gone, some part of you kept believing I might come home." You're my brother," Emma said simply. "That's what family does. We don't give up on each other." As they drove back toward the hotel, Marcus pointed out changes in the city: new buildings, expanded roads, businesses that had opened or closed since his childhood. Madison had grown and evolved while he was gone, but the essential character remained the same. It was still the place where he had learned to ride a bike, where he had collected fireflies on summer evenings, where he had felt safe and loved and whole. The hotel lobby was decorated with a massive Christmas tree, surrounded by presents wrapped in gold and silver paper. Children ran between the furniture, while their parents checked in for holiday visits with grandparents and extended family. Normal families doing normal things, celebrating the season of hope and renewal. Marcus watched the children with a sad smile. Emma knew he was thinking about all the Christmases he had missed, all the normal childhood experiences that had been stolen from him. But she also saw something else in his expression: peace, perhaps, or at least acceptance. He had survived, he had escaped, he had built a meaningful life from the wreckage of his childhood. "I have something for you," Marcus said as they reached his hotel room. He pulled a small, wrapped package from his suitcase, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. "I've been carrying this around for years, waiting for the right moment." Inside was a photograph. Their family's last Christmas together, the four of them posed in front of the tree. Marcus was grinning widely, holding up the baseball glove that had been his favorite gift. Emma was trying to look mature and sophisticated at 12, wearing a new sweater their grandmother had knitted. Their parents looked young and happy, arms around each other, completely unaware that their world was about to shatter. "Where did you get this?" Emma asked, her voice choked with emotion. "I took it with me when I left. It was in my jacket pocket. Robert let me keep it because he said it would help me remember why I was protecting my family." Marcus touched the edge of the photograph gently. "It was the only thing I had of home for all those years." Emma stared at the faces in the picture, her parents as they had been, young and optimistic and in love. Marcus as he had been, innocent and trusting and full of dreams. and herself, caught between childhood and adolescence, not knowing that her brother was silently carrying an unbearable burden. "We look so happy," she whispered. "We were happy. That's what I want you to remember, Emma. Not the pain that came after, but the joy that came before. We had 8 years of being a real family, of loving each other completely. Not everyone gets that." They spent Christmas Eve talking late into the night, sharing memories and making plans for the time they had left. Marcus wanted to return to his work, to help other survivors for as long as his health permitted. Emma wanted to take a leave of absence, to spend these precious months getting to know her brother as the man he had become. "There's something else," Marcus said as the hotel grew quiet around them. "I want to write a book about what happened. Not a memoir exactly, but a guide for other survivors. Something that might help families understand how abuse works, how predators operate within trusted relationships. That's a wonderful idea. You could help so many people. Will you help me write it? You understand the family perspective, the long-term impact on siblings and parents. Together, we could create something really valuable." Emma nodded, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. They would use their story to help others, to turn their pain into something healing and productive. It wouldn't undo the past, wouldn't restore the years they had lost, but it would give meaning to their reunion. As Christmas Day dawned cold and bright, Emma realized that this was the gift she had been waiting for without knowing it. Not just her brother's return, but the chance to help him make sense of his survival, to bear witness to his courage, to be part of his healing journey. They had been robbed of 20 years together, but the time they had left would be rich with love and purpose and truth. Marcus Whitfield had come home for Christmas, bringing with him a story of unimaginable trauma and remarkable resilience. His return would generate headlines, prompt investigations, and inspire other survivors to speak their truth. But for Emma, the real miracle was simpler and more profound. Her baby brother had survived, had thrived, had found his way back to her when it mattered most. And for however long they had together, they would face the future as family, united by love that had endured across decades of separation and pain. On Christmas morning, they returned to Elm Street one final time. The snow had stopped, and pale winter sunlight filtered through the bare branches of the oak tree their father had planted the year Marcus was born. They stood together in the yard, where they had played as children, older now, marked by loss and trauma, but still brother and sister, still connected by bonds that even the worst betrayal couldn't break. "Ready?" Emma asked, linking her arm through Marcus's. "Ready," he replied, and together they walked away from the house of their childhood, toward whatever time they had left, toward the work of healing that would define their remaining days together. The boy who had vanished on a snowy December night had finally come home, not as the child who had left, but as the man who had survived. And in a world that often seemed devoid of miracles, that survival was miracle enough.